Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for attending. I'm going to talk about Dependency-Track version 3.3, which just launched last Thursday, actually. So there's exciting new things in there that I want to talk about, provide the ability for anyone to ask some questions. I'll definitely be in a position to provide some answers, as well as give you a sneak peek of the things that we're thinking about for version 3.4, which is going to be, we're really excited about. So in 3.2 and 3.3, these were essentially foundation releases, meaning that, that they had new features and these sorts of things, but they didn't really necessarily change the way best practices should be done. In version 3.4, it really is a game changer, and it builds on top of this the work that we've done on 3.2 as well as 3.3. So if there's questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. But we've got 30 minutes for the presentation. I'm using this is kind of the first of its kind. This is the first presentation that we're doing like this. I'm using a trial account of Zoom right now, and it is limited to 40 minutes. So so I am kind of time boxed. If it is successful, we'll go ahead and get community feedback to see if this is something we want to continue doing. I also plan to post the videos up on YouTube. So for those who can't join or can't participate and ask their questions, at least they can review on their own time. So that's the plan anyway. We'll see how the recording function of Zoom actually works. So lots of enhancements in 3.3. This is basically just a copy off the changelog. So we added support for being able to manually upload CycloneDX and SPDX bill of material documents from the user interface. So Dependency-Track was designed to be integrated in a very automated type of environment, CI/CD, where you're constantly throwing bill of material documents at Dependency-Track pretty much all the time. But if you want to quickly evaluate Dependency-Track or just support commercial off-the-shelf software, for example, you're not necessarily going to have that workflow. So we wanted to add a way for users to manually upload bill of material documents, and thanks to Dan Cornell at Denim Group for twisting my arm to get that implemented. Though, thanks, Dan. We greatly improved LDAP, and we're going to be talking about some LDAP enhancements later on. We added an API for that allows you to take everything from a project and export that into CycloneDX format, which we're really excited about. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Oops. Let me go back here. We added the ability to track the progress of work when a BOM is uploaded. You're not going to see any immediate benefit from this. The immediate benefit that you're going to see really comes down to a future version of the Jenkins plugin. It's really going to be a game changer, especially for dependency check users. We added the ability to do tracking of audited and unaudited metrics. We added the ability to create a new version of an existing project, as well as search enhancements. So when you're on the project page, for example, you can actually search by a given tag of a project, and you'll actually see the results. So just usability type enhancements there. But if we want to dive into a couple of these real quick, auditing metrics. So we track vulnerability metrics, and we track, components and that sort of things over time. And in 3.3, we introduced auditing metrics. So when you actually come up with results and you can, you go through the auditing, the triaging workflow, when you're looking at the actual findings and you're making comments, you're making analysis decisions, we're now tracking that just like any other kind of statistic. So we're tracking that at the portfolio level, we're tracking that at the project level, and we are tracking it at the component level. However, auditing is a best practice, right? And we want the portfolio and every project in the portfolio to be audited, right? We want the findings to at least be looked at a human being by a human being. But component auditing is not necessarily something that you would want to do, that you would want to encourage to be done, because that literally affects every project in your portfolio. So we're not necessarily wanting to display metrics on that, even though we are tracking those metrics and using our APIs. You can actually query on those metrics if you need them. So this is essentially what the auditing metrics looked like in 3.3. I onboarded a brand new project here. This is the project view. So there's an additional chart in the middle here for auditing progress. It is a percentage, so 0 to 100%. As you start auditing your projects, the findings in your project, that percentage will obviously increase. Over on the right-hand side, we've got the number of audited findings, so findings that are audited, as well as the percentage of that. And that is both on the project as well as the portfolio view. Okay, so manually uploading bill of materials. Like we said earlier, it's this feature is really designed for users to quickly evaluate Dependency-Track without having to set up all the automation, CI/CD, everything else that would typically be required, even though obviously that's the best practice. But if you just want to get started, or if you want to support the onboarding of commercial off-the-shelf software, for example, uploading a bill of material is kind of important. So essentially the steps for that is to either generate or obtain a bill of material file. Generating one is either the Cyclone DX. We've got Cyclone DX plugins for Maven, for NPM, for what other ecosystems are out there? NPM, NuGet, and there's other ecosystems coming as well. If your ecosystem isn't supported, always give back to the community if you want. Or you can obtain a bill of material. We support Cyclone DX, obviously, and we support SPDX. And essentially the process is to just upload. That's it. So create a project, upload it. And this is essentially what it looks like. So on your project page, when you're looking at your dependencies, you now have an upload BOM button. And when you hit that button, you're now presented with a dialog box to specify the file name for the BOM that you want to upload. So it's very simple. One of the new features that made it into 3.3, which this is one of the features in version 1.0. So when Dependency-Track was in its infancy back in 2013, there was a feature called clone, and it did what you would think it does. So when you want to create a new version of an existing project, you would clone it, and it would carry over all the dependencies. And that was one feature that, for one reason or another, just didn't make it when the Dependency-Track project was rebooted and 3.0 was launched. And one of the users created a GitHub issue on this and kind of pointed that out, and it was so obvious. I don't know why it was overlooked, but essentially now you can create a new version of an existing project, and that can optionally carry over all the tags that you've tagged on that project. Project properties, these are things that are not, at least today, they're not exposed in the UI. There is an API for it, But as we talk about some of the future integrations, project properties are going to be very important. Things like, integration with other systems, defect trackers, these sorts of things, all take advantage of project level properties. So if you have a new version of a project, for example, and it uses the same defect tracker, you don't have to set that up for every new version, right? Your dependencies can optionally carry over, as well as your audit history. So this is the huge one, right? Because you obviously don't want to be in a position to audit your findings multiple times for the same for different versions of the same project, especially if you need to keep historical records for that for your individual project versions. So this is the huge one right here. I think this is going to be a huge time saver for a lot of organizations. So this is what it looks like. When you go to edit the project, you'll now get a add version button, and if you click on that button, you'll be prompted to specify the version that you want to create, as well as what aspects you want to include in that new version. And by default, everything is checked. So if you don't want to include audit history, or if you don't want to include tags or properties, just uncheck those, but by default they will be checked. This is definitely a very under the cover type of enhancement, and in fact it actually consumed the majority of the development time for version 3.3. It's changes that most organizations probably won't even notice once it's running. But we've made tremendous, I mean tremendous enhancements with our LDAP support. We initially supported Active Directory, because most organizations do run Active Directory, and we tested with very limited other LDAP servers. And in this version, we have dramatically improved LDAP compatibility. In fact, there's an entire chart of the LDAP servers that we support now, as well as sample configurations for 4 different LDAP servers that we've actually tested with. Highly suggest you change out the change log. The configuration URL, the middle URL there, now has a sample configuration file that's been updated, as well as the last link there, LDAP configuration, that provides concrete examples of how you would set up LDAP configuration for various LDAP implementations. 2 new features that were added to this release, though, is the automatic provisioning of users, as well as the automatic synchronization of teams in Dependency-Track to LDAP groups in your directory server. So these are optional features. They are disabled by default, but there are configuration parameters that allow you to automatically provision users, for example. Scenario for that would be if a user is successfully authenticated to LDAP but does not have a local account in Dependency-Track, this option, if enabled, would automatically create that account. And if team synchronization is also enabled, which is disabled by default, but it is optional, if that team synchronization option is enabled and you have a mapping between a team in Dependency-Track and a group in LDAP, it will automatically assign that user to the appropriate team, giving them whatever permissions that you have actually assigned to that team. So it's a really good way for you to essentially onboard users via LDAP, control their access to Dependency-Track via LDAP without having to manually do that in Dependency-Track. So hopefully for a lot of organizations, this is going to be a real time saver, especially if you have a different group, identity and access management group within your organization that actually is responsible for controlling access to these types of systems. So the directory support, we support, it's been tested with Apache DS, it's been tested with Fedora 389, Active Directory, and eDirectory. For Active Directory, there's actually two different ways you can do it up. In Active Directory, and in some other directory servers support this, others do not, and there's really no standardized way to represent a search filter for them. So it's really up to you to kind of figure that out. But in Active Directory, we also support nested groups. So if you want to do the team synchronization, you can actually, you're not necessarily going to be limited to that top level group that you map it to. It will optionally recurse down to filter out all the other nested groups within that group. So in Active Directory, there is a standard way to represent that in an LDAP search filter. But in all the other Active Directory servers, for the most part, they each have their own way to represent that type of search filter. So you might be able to do it, but out of the box, we provide examples for how to do that with Active Directory. But the overall gist of this release was really greatly improved LDAP compatibility. So those are the major features for this release. At this time, if there's any questions, let's go ahead and open the floor for any questions. And if we have some time at the end, we'll talk about what's coming with version 3.4.
I have a question about the update. How do I update with the current version if I'm using a Tomcat Word file?
How do you update? You're using the Tomcat what?
Yeah, I'm using a Tomcat file. I mean Tomcat Word file. It's a Tomcat container application that I have deployed.
Sure. So to upgrade, let's see. The upgrade was actually pretty self-explanatory. I think. I think if you go to the docs, there's actually a oops. Let me get back here. There's I think it's just a drop-in replacement actually, because the upgrade is actually handled for you. So if you're coming from 3.2, for example, there's really nothing you can do. There's really nothing you have to do. It's literally just a drop-in replacement. If you have LDAP configured, however, you will have to modify some parameters. So the changelog actually provides some of the configurations changes that have been done. So this change, for example, or this property is no longer there. This property is there, but it has a slightly different meaning. It now refers to the user's DN, not just their username. The meaning of this property has changed, as well as there's 4 new properties. So in terms of upgrading, it is a drop-in replacement. An upgrade script will run, so your database will be automatically upgraded to the 3.3 schema. But you will, if you have LDAP configured, you will have to make some configuration changes here. If you go to the configuration link, you will see, the default configuration with all of the changes already in there. So you can use this kind of as a reference. And as you can see, the domain is gone. Some of the new properties are now there. So use this as a base. And then for LDAP configuration, these are the concrete examples that are now provided for you. So if you want to learn how to set up Active Directory, for example, this is a guide that'll kind of help you do that. Just obviously change your DN, change your username, that sort of thing. But it has been tested with all of these directory servers. So in terms of the upgrade, that's really the only change that you might have to make.
So I would have a question as well.
Yep.
Active Directory integration looks quite nice and probably helps us with setting up in our organization. One other thing is I already asked at the Google group if there are any plans in rewriting it, or at least make it possible to deploy several instances alongside each other, so that we can run it on our OpenShift cluster, so that we can have some sort of resilience while they are upgrading the clusters, that Dependency-Track continuously runs for all our teams so they can use it. Any plans on that?
That is so you're referring to the enhancement request for the Kubernetes Helm support, or is this slightly different?
Just a general question. If it's Helm support, probably would work as well.
Yeah, if you create a you actually asked a question in the Google group. Did I respond to that? I actually don't.
Asking about the size that or that any dependency track instance was deployed already, and you said you sometimes asked the Twitterverse, but you didn't really get a response about the size that people deployed it. So that was basically it. I haven't followed up on it yet because I was distracted by some other stuff in the meantime. But in general, it's still a question, and it would be. It's an important point if we want to deploy it for our in our case.
Sure. I would suggest, so I have some traceability of the issue, and we can have a reference to go back. Go ahead and ask the question in GitHub issues. So go ahead and create an issue in GitHub. I will flag it as a question, and we can kind of iterate on what the actual requirement is, because I'm very much interested in the use case. It's a use case that I didn't necessarily plan for, but I think the server is flexible enough to allow that kind of flexibility. So go ahead and create the issue in GitHub. We'll chat about it, and if there's work to be done there, then we'll go ahead and put that in the roadmap for you.
Sure, great.
Cool.
Thanks.
Sure. Questions? We got about 6 minutes left. Like I said at the top of the presentation, top of the hour, it is time boxed. I am using a demo version of Zoom at the moment. If the presentation and whatnot, if it goes over well, whatnot, the project will end up paying for subscription, but at least for the time being, it is time boxed for demo accounts. Any further questions, or should we dive into what's coming? All right. Well, if you do have questions in the future, you all know how to find me. I am Steve Springett on Twitter. You know where the GitHub is. You know where the project is. So use those avenues to ask your questions. And with that, let's go back to the slideshow, because this one feature is going to be very, very important. So Dependency-Track was designed to handle a lot of work. In fact, the basis of Dependency-Track is actually built on a thin server architecture that I had built, maybe 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. And its original intent was to do asynchronous video transcoding. So it was really designed to be able to handle a bunch of really complex tasks asynchronously and kind of keep track of all that. And if you think of security and security events and bill of materials and CI/CD, it's kind of the same use case. We're talking about different things, but the underlying foundation is literally the same. But the entire core was really designed to be asynchronous. But what happens when I want to be able to track, when I upload a bomb to when that bomb is actually done processing, because there might be a bunch of analyzers that it goes through, right? I upload the bomb, it actually gets parsed. The database is updated with the new bomb metadata. Based on all that new metadata, one or more vulnerability analyzers are kicked off. So there's a lot of things that are actually happening, most of which are all asynchronous. But what happens when I need to be able to track that? And what can I do if I track that? Well, one of the things that you can actually do is put that in a pipeline, Jenkins pipeline, for example, and be able to upload a bomb and get results. So for users of like other SCA, especially commercial SCA, some of these do this, some of them do it in a slightly different way. But the idea here is to essentially abstract the security part away. So really at build time, the only thing you're doing is creating a bill of material. That's it. You don't care about, you know, what scanners are configured. You don't have to replicate NVD information or any of that nonsense that a lot of you know, organizations do now, especially ones using Dependency-Track. So the idea here is to make it as simple as possible. And if you are dealing with a large infrastructure, you know, 100, 200, 300 Jenkins servers, this becomes exceptionally important. Trust me, I've managed 200 Jenkins servers running Dependency-Track. It's possible. I've built it to do it, but it's a lot of duct tape and super glue to keep it running. So the idea here is to really upload a bomb and be able to analyze that, as well as report all those vulnerability metrics back in a single job. So that's why the tracking of the bomb is really important. There was a question raised.
Yeah, just it's actually fits quite well there. We had the problem while testing Dependency-Track when you upload a bomb for a NPM project, then it goes through all the dependencies like one by one, and each time asking the NPM API, asking for security issues, then probably writing it to the database, and then it goes on to the next one. So which, if you have an Angular project, for instance, you have about 900 dependencies in there. And yeah, 900 dependencies in there, and it takes quite a lot of time because it's about a second per dependency. So it takes about 15 minutes to finally get feedback if everything is fine or not. Is that part of the update or of the things you want to improve as well?
Let's see. I'm not sure how the old NSP analyzer worked, but I'm fairly sure that the NPM audit analyzer, which was actually backported to 3.2.1 and from 3.3, actually works a little bit differently. So the NPM audit analyzer, what it does now is, if you've got like 900 dependencies, what it will do is it will essentially paginate those dependencies. So it will call out to NPM audit with all of your dependencies, but the NPM audit API doesn't like duplicates. So if you've got like multiple versions of jQuery, for example, in your package lock JSON, it will, which is, you know, a supported use case. It actually doesn't work with that, and that's not a dependency track limitation. That's an NPM audit limitation. They just take the first one they find and use that. So what we do is we look for any duplicates in the bomb that was uploaded, and if there are duplicates, we will then essentially we'll just upload them all minus the duplicates, and then we'll do the duplicates one after the next in each subsequent API call. So you're not going to have 900 requests to NPM. You're going to have maybe one, maybe a handful, but it should be much faster. Absolutely.
But what you're describing is now the implementation for the new version, not from the old one. Right?
It was backported to 3.2.1. So if you're using 3.2.1, that behavior should still be there.
Okay.
If 3.2.0 or before, it uses the NSP API, and I believe I was doing a 1 per. So that
I had a look at the source code, and it was just going through the list one by one. So there wasn't any parallelization, at least none I could find in the code. So that's why I'm asking. But I will just have another look at it, and if I still find some issue,
go ahead and create the issue on GitHub. That's what it's there for.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, of course, of course. We're almost out of time. Looks like I had an extension from Zoom, which was very nice of them. So let me just cover these last 2 points, and then we'll call it a day. But so the Jenkins plugin literally is going to be able to, especially for the dependency check users, is really going to change the way that those folks actually use dependency check, because it actually runs dependency check better than dependency check does, which I'm really excited about. And I'm working, so I have personal relationships with the folks at Micro Focus Fortify. I'm building a plugin for Software Security Center so that you'll be able to get your component analysis results as well as your static analysis results in a single pane of glass. That's really important for security teams and for development teams. I also have a relationship with some folks over at Kenna Security. And Kenna Security is kind of it's a solution, a cloud-based solution similar to what you'd find in ThreadFix. We already support ThreadFix. We've supported ThreadFix for quite some time. But Kenna Security, now with project properties, we can now support things like Kenna Security. And so Kenna Security is a large vulnerability aggregation and normalization platform that a lot of organizations use, especially in financial services and these types of things. So these are a couple new improvements that we're working on for 3.4. I think the Jenkins plugin is going to be the game changer, at least for us. I think it's going to really dramatically alter how organizations approach SCA, because the quote-unquote scanning at build time is essentially abstracted away. We no longer necessarily scan on our Jenkins machine. That's not what we're trying to do here. And there's a lot of other benefits to doing this. So expect a lot of demos, announcements, white papers, these types of things concerning bill of materials as we approach 3.4. So with that, I want to thank everyone for attending today. Hopefully you thought it was beneficial. Please provide feedback. I don't know if you're going to get a question thing after this session or not. I can't remember how I configured it. Reach out to me on Twitter. Create a GitHub issue for things that you want to see. Or you can always send an email to me at steve.springett@owasp.org. I'm also on the OWASP Dependency-Track Slack channel as well.